but the bottom line is he found that we were likely to succeed on the merits and that we had shown those kinds of harms.
Are you concerned that
Go ahead.
Are you concerned that home security personnel are not going to follow the ruling? There's going to be confusion in customs?
Did you mind repeating that one more time so we'll make sure I heard it correctly?
Are you concerned that Homeland Security personnel is not going to follow?
Oh, the question is, I'll repeat it for everybody. The question is, am I concerned that Homeland Security will not follow the judge's ruling? No. We're a nation of laws. It is absolutely my expectation that the federal government will honor this ruling by this judge today.
Are there limitations to this ruling?
The question is, are there limitations to this ruling? Noah, do you want to? I mean, it's pretty broad, but I just want to make sure you get it.
Well, it is, I mean, to be clear, it's a temporary relief, so there still needs to be further hearings before it's permanently struck down, but today is a very big step along the way to that result.
And one thing I would add to that, which is no mention, it's temporary until the judge addresses it on a permanent basis. But again, as I mentioned earlier, in order to reach the decision he did today, one of the factors he had to rule on or to keep in mind was the likelihood of success on the merits for the state. And obviously he felt that was in our favor, which is obviously a good indication of what might come next.
Some legal experts told us today that this was expected, that the bar is not that high when it comes to temporary restraining orders. Maybe you can talk about
they're
that.
not legal experts. Those aren't legal experts. The bar is, and you heard it in the courtroom. I mean, the judge made that clear. We accept that. We knew going in. We talked amongst ourselves about the challenge, frankly, of asking for a TRO. Any TRO is difficult. Any temporary restraining order is difficult on any issue, especially so on an issue of this magnitude, to put it mildly. I think Judge Robart made that very clear in the courtroom. So no, there is not a legal expert in this country who would somehow suggest that the burden is easy. It's exactly the opposite. And then that's by design, right? The burden should be difficult to say to the president, no, what you just did cannot go forward, right? That's significant relief.
Are you surprised, given some of the lines of questioning by Judge Robart, for example, saying that you couldn't necessarily prove that it was discriminatory to Muslims based on campaign statements in June, that he nevertheless went your way entirely? And what do you think? Was there a certain part of your case that you think put that over the top?
I'll have Noah maybe take part of that, but I'll repeat it. So the question went to, were we surprised based on some of the challenging questions that Judge Robart asked of Noah, of the state? Was I surprised by his ruling? No. I mean, it's anytime you're in a courtroom, a good, thoughtful judge, his or her job is to ask the most difficult, challenging questions. That's their job, right? And so you go in expecting that. And frankly, even before he announced his decision, my thought to myself was, hey, we got a fair hearing here, right? He was tough on us. He was tough on the federal government. He asked, I thought, the difficult, challenging questions. That's his job to do that. Noah, maybe you can address on the other part of it.
I just say it was very clear that he had thought very hard about the hardest issues in the case. This was not a rash decision. It was very clearly thought through, and his questions reflected that he was asking the hardest questions of both sides.
I just want to be just clear that the specific elements you were arguing in this case, that the TRO, I should say the executive order in its entirety is not functional, right? Is that what you're saying?
Do you want to repeat the question for everybody?
Yeah, so the question was, is the executive order in its entirety blocked? And the technical answer to that is no. We only challenged the parts that are actually sort of affecting people immediately, which are the parts about refugees and the parts about targeting these 7 countries for not being allowed to enter the country. So technically we were challenging parts 3 and part 5 of the order. A lot of the other parts are things like a policy statement, long-term directives to the Department of Homeland Security that do not have any immediate impact and that sort of thing. So we were not challenging those right away. But the parts that have been getting so much attention and have been causing such immediate harm to people, stranding them overseas and such, are enjoined right away.
In the courtroom, you said that one of the DOJ's arguments about judicial review was scary or frightening. Can you expand on what you meant by that?
Repeat the question for everybody.
Sure. So I did say at one point that the Department of Justice's argument was frightening, and the argument was essentially that if the president says, I'm doing this in the national security interest, then a court cannot review whether that's the real reason or whether there's even any rational reason for the president's action. And our view is that's not the law. That's a scary view of the law, and luckily the judge rejected that idea.
Could you repeat that one more time? I think she's.
What,
Go ahead.
yeah. So
repeat
the
it,
question
yeah.
was, what recourse do we have? Does the state have if the border agents do not follow the rule? The normal things that you could seek in federal court, such as contempt. I mean, we're not there yet, so hopefully that won't be necessary. But that would be the sort of thing that we could seek. We could come back to Judge Robart and say that they're not following it. Again, we trust and expect that won't happen, but we could do that if we had to. As best we can.
The question is, will the state monitor that? You can be sure we are deeply invested in this matter, and we'll be closely monitoring what's going on across the country. I will be in touch immediately with my colleagues around the country, attorneys general around the country. So I'm sure if we see any evidence that'll get to us, and we take any appropriate action. But to be candid, I do not expect that to happen. Again, we're a nation of laws. Folks may not everybody may like this decision. I'm certain the president will not like this decision, but it is his job, it is his responsibility, it is his obligation as our president to honor it, and I'll make sure he does. No, I'll repeat the question in case you didn't hear it. So the question was, I may have taken the first crack at it. It's I'll paraphrase. The question went to the president often does have broad authority in issues like this. What do we think made the difference in overcoming that hurdle? Do you want to maybe take the first crack and I may follow up?
So I think a couple things that we talked about in the courtroom. Number one, this order was so clearly poorly thought through and crafted that the idea that it's really directed at national security as opposed to targeting people based on their religion just doesn't. It's not plausible. The most obvious example that we talked about in the courtroom was that the president apparently hadn't made up his mind before issuing the order whether it applied to lawful permanent residents or not. So those are people here with green cards. There's roughly 500,000 of those people from these 7 countries who live in this country, and in many cases have lived here for a long time, work at our businesses, have families here and all that. And Friday they said it did apply to them. Saturday, Department of Homeland Security said again that it applied to them, and they blocked people on that basis. And then Sunday they started to change their mind, and then by Monday they had completely changed their mind, but in different contradictory statements from different people. And then finally on Wednesday, the White House counsel put out something called authoritative guidance, saying that it didn't apply to them. But I mean, you couldn't imagine a more basic issue that should have been addressed before issuing that order, whether it applied to 500,000 people who had been living here for a long time with long-standing ties to the country, and they hadn't thought that through. So I think those are the sorts of things that just suggested to the judge that the stated purpose of protecting national security was not really what was motivating this order. That, along with all the president's many statements targeting Islam and Muslims and those of his advisors. So. Of course, I don't know exactly what the judge was focused on, but I think those are the sorts of things that made this a different case than a lot of the other executive actions that have been taken over the years to protect the country. And this is just fundamentally different from those in how haphazardly it's been carried out and how poorly thought through it was.
What is the effect of this decision on pending litigation in other states?
The question is, what's the effect of this decision on pending litigation in other states? Feel free to jump in if you want to add anything. So it's not necessarily, doesn't bind another court in another part of the country, right, if there's future decisions. But obviously judges look at decisions made by judges around the country. But even before those judges get to it, the action today, of course, takes action immediately nationwide, putting a stop to it, right? And I think the judge obviously got it right, and there may be those other cases will move forward, but undoubtedly what the Judge Robart did today will be cited in other courtrooms around the country as well.
There are at least 2 cases just in this court, in his courtroom, that name individuals, and so it impacts those cases as well.
This decision shuts down the executive order immediately, shuts it down. So for all those individuals, right, that relief is there. Folks can travel to this country as they could before the executive order, right? That relief is immediate. It has happened right now. That is, that's the bottom line.
Do you worry that because this is happening at 4 p.m. Pacific time, it's going to cause a lot of confusion again on a Friday going into the weekend, or this may not be confusion?
The question went to, hey, because this happened at 4 o'clock, would there be some confusion? I'll tell you where there's been confusion. The president's executive order. That's what caused confusion. I'm sorry, there's no other way to put it. It's Keystone Cops. It really is. That's not just me speaking, that's Republican members of Congress, right? That's what's caused the confusion. And so no, I don't worry about the confusion. There's nothing confusing about the judge ordered. And the federal government will be expected to abide by it, and they will.
Given the appeals process, how long are we expecting the appeals process to take, and what goes on during the appeals process as far as immigration?
So the question goes to the appeals process, and Noah, anything you want to add on? I mean, it's a little difficult to answer, but as best you can, maybe you can elaborate.
Honestly, I think you'd have to direct that question at first to the federal government. Hopefully they will recognize that now, in our case, obviously this nationwide injunction, but in a number of other cases around the country brought by individuals, there have been rulings in their favor, and hopefully the federal government, the president, will realize that this order is patently unconstitutional and will abandon it. But if they don't, it'll be up to them what the appeal process looks like in the timeline.
That's hard to predict, right? But I think Noah's point is well taken, which is the federal government has a choice. They can appeal or choose not to appeal, right? So to Noah's point, it's my hope that they will understand that what was done was unconstitutional and unlawful. And just again, to be clear, as Noah emphasized, there have been other cases, to your question as well, on behalf of individuals, right, or a smaller group of individuals. Those have been very important cases. We referenced some of them today, but those did not go to the constitutionality of the key provisions of the executive order. So that is one important difference in this case, which shuts it down nationwide as opposed to providing relief for a handful of individuals. Those are important cases, want to be clear about that, for those individuals. This case is the first of its kind that addresses the very constitutionality of the key provisions of the executive order and has now shut it down.
Any idea how it could affect the visas that were revoked today?
The question goes to any idea how this could affect the visas that were revoked today. Do you guys want to?
Sure. I mean, the visas weren't just revoked today. There was an order issued by an official from the Department of State on January 27th purporting to revoke visas. So for any visa that was revoked pursuant to the executive order, we would expect that those visas would still be available then, absent some reason why the Department of State, other than the executive order, why they wouldn't have issued.
And Colleen is head of the Wing Luke Civil Rights Unit in our office. Her last name's Melody, M-E-L-O-D-Y. If there's no other questions, we'll be available afterwards. And I want to say thanks again to the legal team. What they did was truly extraordinary under difficult circumstances to put together complex pleadings, support from many aspects of our state, to do something at its most fundamental level in the law, which is hold our president to the rule of law. And when one goes to law school, one reads about big cases, significant cases that do exactly that. And this is a case in that spirit, right? We are a nation of laws. Not even the president can violate our Constitution. And Judge Robart made the right decision declaring this unconstitutional, and we look forward to further proceedings. Thank you all very much. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, folks. You're watching the Fox 10 News Now stream, where just moments ago, a federal judge in Seattle temporarily blocked President Donald Trump's ban on people from 7 predominantly Muslim countries. U.S. District Judge James Robart granted a temporary restraining order Friday at the request of Washington State and Minnesota that's effective nationwide. Trump signed an executive order last week that sparked protesters across the country and confusion at airports as some travelers were detained. Lawyers for the U.S. government argued that the states don't have standing to challenge the order and said Congress gave the president authority